Imagine that. Okay, we're recording now. So yeah, next week will be about the soil food web, and then the week after that, I think is November 19th, which will be kind of the year in review of walking through, a few things we did this year. Nothing really springs to mind, but obviously it'll be heavy on talking about the conservatory, a little bit behind the scenes of that whole process, about some of the things that you might not be going in the basement of the conservatory to see what we did down there. There's some ins and outs that happen with that project that are really interesting. We also, of course, have the wreath classes. We are down to, when I checked this morning, we had 7 seats left for the Wednesday program, which is December 2, 3, I think 4th. Can't remember. It's whatever that first week in December is. Let's see. Yeah, just, oh my God, I was right. December 4th. So there's 7 seats left for that wreath class. All the other ones are sold out. So if you have been waiting, don't wait much longer. These are always a hit with everyone. Michelle does a fantastic job doing it. A lot of families have, this has become kind of a holiday tradition of doing this. So don't miss out on that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Eric from Old Salem. He was kind enough to bring out and I keep getting the group's name, Southern Garden History Society. I might have it by now. That I've got to get Renolda more engaged in that, considering that it was engaged with it at the beginning. Now that hopefully some bandwidth is starting to open up, now that the greenhouse is behind us, that we can focus on some new initiatives. But definitely, looking forward to this talk. And without further ado, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. Should I clip this on, or
you can clip it?
Yeah, it works best.
That works best. We're all set. But just to talk about, a bit about Old Salem Gardens, obviously that portion of everything.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here. Hello to everyone out on Zoom. Yeah, my name is Eric Jackson. I'm the director of horticulture at Old Salem. I just on Monday was my 15th. I just had my 15th year anniversary at Old Salem, so I've been there for 15 years. I started and a volunteer the year before that, and then was a part-time gardener, and then head gardener, and then I've been director of horticulture for the last 2 years or 3 years, one of those. Yeah, so thanks for coming out today. I'll just jump into it. Hopefully I can figure out how to read my notes and do everything here. Maybe I got to touch it. Oh, that's it. Yeah. So today I'm gonna talk about the Gardens of Old Salem, seed saving, and our historic plant collection. I'm gonna talk about the history of the garden landscape restoration at Old Salem and how those efforts were informed by research into the immense archive of written records of the Moravians. We'll look at maps, historic depictions of North Carolina Moravians, and what will be an extra specific focus of this presentation, the botanical records, the flora of Salem, and the surrounding area made by the numerous botanists who lived in Salem. Going even deeper, I want us to understand the roots of how these botanists came to be and how they were connected to a larger international network of Moravian botanists and plant collectors, just as the Moravian Church community of Salem was connected to an international network of Moravian communities. And how this network of religious communities was full of people well-versed in natural history, mainly because of the church's action philosophy towards education for all. So who are the Moravians? The origins of the Moravians start back in the 1400s in ancient Bohemia and Moravia, present-day Czech Republic. And it all began with a man named John Huss. Jan Hus was a Czech philosopher, theologian, and reformer, and a key figure in the early Protestant movement. He led a protest movement against the practices of the Roman Catholic hierarchy and advocated for reforms within the Catholic Church, criticizing its corruption and calling for a return to biblical teachings. Huss was excommunicated and ultimately burned at the stake for heresy. Here we go. burned at stake for heresy in 1415. His teachings influenced the Hussite movement and later Protestant Reformation, particularly Martin Luther. Some call Huss the grandfather of the Reformation. The Hussite movement, sparked by John Huss's reformist ideas, led to a period of religious and political upheaval in Bohemia. Out of the radical wing of this movement, the Unitas Fratrum, or Unity of the Brethren, was formed in 1457 as a more pacifist and spiritually focused group, emphasizing simplicity, communal living, and the authority of Scripture, which they translated to the common language. They built a small wooden church in Kunwald, Bohemia, now the Czech Republic, which was used for 90 years. This was the first congregation of the Unitas Fratrum. In 1547, the Unity faced persecution, leading many members to seek refuge in Poland, where they established new communities. Before departing, they planted 3 linden trees, which later grew into one tree in the center of the village of Kunwald. Those who decided to stay in their homeland decided to keep the Brethren heritage a secret in the privacy of their homes. Today, this tree is known as the Brethren's linden tree. The 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 brought further challenges. The Protestant defeat of the Battle of White Mountain in 1620 resulted in severe suppression of Protestant groups, including the Unitas Fratrum. Their properties were confiscated, and members were forced to convert to Catholicism or flee. John Amos Comenius, a prominent leader and educator, became the last bishop of the Unity during this tumultuous period. He worked to preserve the church's teachings and advocated for educational reforms. Despite his efforts, the Unity was forced underground, existing as a hidden seed for nearly a century. Comenius is often called the father of modern education. He developed progressive ideas about universal education, advocating for learning through experience, and the use of vernacular language, and education for all, regardless of gender or social class. Comenius's work had a profound influence on European educational thought, and his emphasis on education and literacy became central to the mission of the Unitas Fratrum, including their descendants, the renewed Unitas Fratrum, also known as the modern-day Moravian Church. In the early 18th century, remnants of the Unitas Fratrum sought refuge on the estate of Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf in Saxony, Germany. Zinzendorf was a German nobleman and theologian. In 1722, they established the community of Herrenhut, and then in 1727, there was a great renewal of the Unitas Fratrum, which was the birth of the modern-day Moravian Church. Herrenhut quickly became the heart of a growing movement for Christian renewal, emphasizing communal living and the importance of charity and modesty in spiritual life. Led by Zinzendorf and enabled by his noble connections, the movement grew quickly. This model of living inspired establishment of over 30 similar settlements worldwide where these core values were preserved and practiced. The Moravians were the first Protestant group to organize a large-scale mission movement. Within 30 years, or about the time they came to North Carolina, which we'll get to that shortly, they had sent hundreds of missionaries across the globe, including the Caribbean, the Americas, the Arctic, Africa, and Asia. The Moravians were pioneers in mission work, unique in their approach of sending lay people, not only clergy, as missionaries. They would go on to grow to become, at one time, the largest international organization outside of the Catholic Church. In 1754, the highest educational institution, the Moravians, was formally institutionalized and put into operation as the Real Academy and Theological Seminary at Barbie in Germany. Real, in this sense, referred to the concept of real education, which was innovative at the time, to the training on objects and models that served the collections to convey the structure and diversity of the world. The goal was a comprehensive general education aimed at practical applicability, which included theological elements centrally. Comprehensive natural history elements were a central part of this curriculum. Barbie was the center of natural history knowledge of the Moravian Brethren in the 18th century. Comprehensive natural history elements were central to this curriculum, so much that Barbie was the center of natural history brethren in the 18th century. In 1756, a separate room or natural history cabinet or cabinet of curiosities was provided for the first time in the castle grounds at Barbie. The intention of this room was to support the scientific training of students and to gather objects sent home by missionaries. Collection objects were used to investigate, determine, and describe nature, scientific purposes for the academic leaders, a few of whom were also botanists, as well as objects of observation and learning in the classroom. The collection included an herbarium of plants collected from both the surrounding local area, but also sent to them from around the world, the Herbarium Barbensis. The Moravian church teachers Friedrich Adam Schuler, who lived from 1718 to 1785, and Johann Jacob Bossart, who lived from 1721 to 1789, initiated botanical education at Barbie. Their various manuscripts and documents demonstrate that both were excellent botanists who incorporated the latest contemporary concepts into their work. Bossart's catalog of the cabinet's botanical contents catalogs the herbarium's collection of about 3,200 specimens from the proximity of Barbie, but also from India, Greenland, Labrador, Russia, North Carolina, and Tahiti. It really documents the global distribution of the community. The collections of minerals, fossils, shells, and plants were very unique at the time and also included over 100 objects from the travels of James Cook, and soon attracted other European academics. Ooh. Sorry, lost my place there. At Barbie, the study of nature was an integral part of the curriculum. In addition to the natural history cabinet, there was a comprehensive library and a botanic garden. Students at Barbie engaged with natural history not only through objects and specimens sent by Moravian missions worldwide, but also through firsthand exploration. One notable example is the 1786 expedition to the Harz Mountains, where 10 students led by natural history lecturer Johann Gottfried Knau embarked on a 10-day journey. Their expedition mirrored the great scientific journeys of the 18th century, meticulously documenting their findings in over 200 pages of manuscripts. Each student focused on a different area of natural history, from botany to geography, even recording the economy and way of life of the local population. They embraced the Linnaean system of classification, creating a systematic list of plants they encountered. This expedition was one of the many that trained future Moravian missionaries and naturalists, preparing them to collect, botanize, and document the natural world across the globe. This tradition of exploration and study deeply connected the Moravian International Network through shared knowledge and a commitment and understanding to the natural world. In the late 1740s, Zinzendorf and the center of the Moravian Church moved to London. In the 1750s, London stood at the crossroads of a burgeoning British colonial empire and a thriving scientific community. The city was home to Sir Hans Sloane, the president of the Royal Society, who possessed the era's most extensive art and natural history collection. Sloane lived near and leased this house to the Moravians in the Zinzendorf and the Moravians, the Lindsay House in Chelsea, which for a time would be the headquarters of the Moravian Brethren. And you can see the Lindsay House is there at the sort of far lower left of the screen right there on the water. And then there's a little garden behind there that became the Moravian graveyard. And then Fetter Lane, the church, was right behind that. That's the Lindsay House. And there's another depiction of the Lindsay House. The Chelsea Physics Garden was also right there nearby at Fetter Lane where the Moravians were, and the Moravians they were growing tea camellias at the Chelsea Physics Garden, and they would use tea from the Physics Garden for the Moravian love feast there at Fetter Lane. This close proximity fostered significant interactions between Sloane and the Moravian community. As a result of these connections, Sloane appointed Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf, along with two other Moravians, Abraham Gerstoff and Sigmund Gerstoff, among others, as trustees of his vast collections. These collections would later become the foundation of the British Museum in London, established in 1753. The History of Greenland by David Crans, published in 1765, stands as one of the most significant Moravian missionary accounts and became a key piece of fundraising in London. Crans, who served as secretary to Zinzendorf, lived in London between 1749 and 1755, where he absorbed the local enthusiasm for natural history He also spent much time in Greenland at the Moravian communities there, shown here as New Herrenhout. And he produced a comprehensive, for that time, natural history of Greenland, the first of its kind. Not only did this work document the Moravian missions in Greenland, but it also offered detailed descriptions of the island's flora, fauna, and native culture, fascinating British audiences. For London's natural history-minded elite, Kranz's history of Greenland became a major attraction, and its success helped secure funding for future Moravian expeditions. This support was bolstered by the Moravians' promise to send back plants and natural history specimens from the new lands they would visit. The Moravians' meticulous documentation practices, fueled by a tradition of literacy and record keeping, positioned their mission reports as valuable resources, merging spiritual and scientific interest and captivating European patrons. Following the tradition of detailed missionary accounts, the combined religious observation with natural history, Christian Oldendorp, who lived from 1721 to 1787, compiled his seminal work, The History of the Mission of Evangelical Brethren on the Caribbean Islands of St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John. Though completed around 1770, was published later in 1777. Similar to David Kranz's History of Greenland, Oldendorp's narrative provided an extensive exploration of the natural history and culture of the Caribbean region. During his time on the islands, Oldendorp meticulously documented the geography, climate, flora, and fauna, offering one of the most comprehensive accounts of the Caribbean's natural environment of that era. He also delved deeply into the lives of indigenous peoples and the enslaved African population, recording their customs, languages, and social structures. His work significantly enriched European understanding of this part of the world and became an invaluable resource for scholars and explorers alike. Oldendorp's history exemplifies the Moravian Brethren's commitment to education and their detailed record keeping, the practice of writing everything down. It underscores how missionary activities were not only spiritual endeavors, but also contributions to the broader fields of anthropology and natural history. Sir Joseph Banks, the renowned English naturalist and president of the Royal Society, found early inspiration in the Moravian community in London, with whom he shared close ties to. In fact, he lived near them as a young adult. Banks read David Kranz's History of Greenland, a text he later credited as a catalyst for his own interest in natural history. After gaining fame through his 1776 expedition to Newfoundland and Labrador and his pivotal role in Captain James Cook's first voyage, Banks became a central figure in botanical science. He transformed Kew Gardens into the world's leading botanical institution, sending botanists around the globe to collect new plant specimens. The Moravians contributed to these efforts, sending Banks specimens gathered from their missions, particularly in India. This exchange reflects the unique synergy between the Moravian missions and European scientific exploration, with the Moravians' natural history observation and Banks' global botanical reach, both contributing to an unprecedented era of discovery and documentation. The Moravian Church's international network of missions fostered a significant presence in the global botanical community of the 18th century. Moravian botanists contributed extensively to the era's emerging botanical correspondence network, bridging Europe and America. Their collected plant specimens often found their way, sometimes anonymously, often anonymously, into the major herbariums across Europe and the Americas, integrating Moravian knowledge and resources into the broader scientific landscape. This legacy of natural history demonstrates that the Moravians were not only spiritually motivated but deeply engaged with the scientific pursuits of their time, established themselves as active participants in the global scientific network. And these are just some close-ups. So each one of these leaves on this grapevine represent one of the Moravian communities that were out at the time that this was made. That I don't know exactly what year this was made, but you can sort of see close up. There's Herrenhout there, sort of in the center, and then things are all these branches off from there. And then this is a compiled list of Moravian botanists and plant collectors from 1717 to 1895, and sort of a timeline when they were active. I've been sort of working and trying to compile some information on all these folks as I can, but just sort of illustrate the number of folks who were either collecting plants, botanizing, or recording natural history. and then Moravian botanists and plant collectors worldwide. These are just some of the main areas where they were active in Europe, Greenland, Caribbean, Labrador, Southern Africa, India, Tibet, Java, and America. So that brings us here. So the Moravians first arrived in America in 1735, initially attempting to establish a community in Savannah, Georgia, which ultimately did not succeed. However, 1741, they founded the lasting settlements in Bithynia, notably Bethlehem and Nazareth, which became key Moravian hubs. Over time, they expanded their presence, establishing congregations in New Jersey, Maryland, Philadelphia, Staten Island, New York. These communities serve as frontier centers focused on spreading the gospel, particularly among Native American populations. Bethlehem emerged as the central hub of Moravian activity in colonial America, anchoring their mission efforts and establishing their enduring influence there. In 1752, the Moravian Church purchased nearly 100,000 acres in North Carolina, a tract they initially named Wacow, later anglicized to Wachovia. This land became the foundation for Moravian settlement and growth in the South, serving as the central hub for their communities and mission efforts in this region. Wachovia would go on to play a significant role in expanding the Moravians' influence and establishing their unique cultural and religious presence in the southern colonies. The land that the Moravians acquired in North Carolina, known as Wachovia, lay within the southern woodland region, originally part of the colonized territories of the Tutelo, Kiawe, Saponi, Catawba, and Chirwa peoples. This area served as hunting grounds and trading routes for these and other native communities. The British had claimed the land in 1663, and by the early 1700s, many native groups had moved away due to pressures from European settlers. In 1753, a year after the Moravians purchased the tract from British statesman John Carteret, the Tupelo and Saponi, displaced from their homeland, sought refuge with the Cayuga in present-day New York, marking a significant chapter in the complex history of colonial expansion and native displacement. The early Moravian subsistence in Wachovia and the building of Salem were deeply reliant on the land's resources, which had been stewarded by generations of native peoples. The so-called wilderness they encountered was, in reality, remnants of a meticulously managed ecosystem, carefully cultivated by indigenous communities for thousands of years. By the time the Moravian settlers arrived, this ancient ecosystem had been largely left untended for nearly 50 years, yet it was far from untouched. Acknowledging the ancestral connections of this land belonging to native peoples who remain present today invites a commitment to honoring native plants and ecosystems essential for environmental resilience in recognition of the land's original stewards and their ongoing legacy. The Moravians established their first North Carolina settlement, Bethabara, on November 17th, 1753, when 15 brethren arriving after a journey on foot from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the first Moravian settlement in Wachovia, Bethabara, meaning house of passage, laid the groundwork for a series of Moravian communities that would follow, including Salem. Bethabara quickly became the hub of religious life, governance, trade, industry, culture, education, and the arts. Within its first 2 decades, the Moravians constructed over 75 buildings. During the French and Indian War, Bethabara, with its 2 forts, served as a protective center for local settlers and a strategic supply depot for the British and their Cherokee allies. The Moravian survival in Bethabara was sustained by crops such as maize, beans, and pumpkins, especially in the early days, staple plants that were cultivated by native peoples for a long time. The Upland Garden at Bethabara, documented in 1759 by Moravian surveyor Philip Christian Gottlieb Reuter, stands as a remarkable example of early American kitchen design, or early American kitchen gardens. This half-acre garden, recorded as Der Upland Garden, was laid out in a unique 9-square pattern with rectangular plots divided by cross paths. These diagonally arranged beds, uncommon for vegetable gardens at the time, raised questions about the Moravians' design intent, whether for utility, aesthetics, improved drainage, or efficient use of space. I tend to think it's really just efficient use of space because you get different row lengths for growing different things. So you can grow some herbs and things on the ends, or if you want more of something, you have longer rows. And I think it's a combination of aesthetics and efficient use of space. Plots numbered 1 through 8 were dedicated to seeds brought personally from Germany, while surrounding border beds features herbs and perennials like asparagus and horseradish. A grape arbor and summer house surrounded by fragrant flowers and shrubs enhance the garden's charm. Archaeological findings at Bethabara confirm the upland garden's layout, and Reuters documentation provides one of the earliest records among American garden designs. Along with Bethabara's Hortus medicus, the medicinal garden, and other Moravian plant inventories, these early records have been invaluable to Old Salem's research-based landscape restoration program, offering authentic insights into 18th century Moravian horticulture practices and plant materials. And yeah, so that's just another version of the upland garden with a plant list. The 1761 Hortus medicus map, created by Moravian surveyor and forester naturalist Brother Reuter, documents the medicinal garden at Bethabara. This garden, the oldest well-documented medical herb garden in the United States, provides a rare and detailed glimpse into the Moravians' use of medicinal plants. They were early garden records. These have also been invaluable to Old Salem in our research, in our landscape restoration program and research into that. Christian Gottlieb Reuter, who created these garden maps in Bethabara, initially served as the Moravian community surveyor, meticulously mapping the entire Wachovia tract, a critical undertaking that provided the Moravians with a detailed understanding of their new land. His skill in surveying, paired with his knowledge of natural history, allowed him to document the region comprehensively, creating what would become known as the Great Map of Wachovia. In 1760, he compiled Reuter's booklet for the land register about Wachovia, further detailing the land's features and resources. Later appointed as the forester and superintendent of hunters, Reuter's role expanded to managing and preserving Wachovia's forests, practice of European-style forestry that would predate Gifford Pinchot's work by nearly over a century. Though not formally a trained botanist, Reuter's expertise in natural history is evident in his 1764 Flora Salemensis, an early account of Wachovia's flora and fauna. This work reflects his keen observational skills and Moravian commitment to environmental stewardship, blending rigorous documentation with a deep appreciation for the land's natural resources. And then this is one of Reuters maps of Wachovia the Bethabara that kind of is hard to see here, but it's similar to the Great Map. He sort of has a lot of designates which is good upland and good lowland and what types of forests are growing where. And then these are some of his booklet for the land register, where he sort of corresponds what's all in the Great Map with sort of what was growing. And he has all of these squiggly lines, sigils, kind of symbols for different trees and different plants. And then different types of land. But yeah, it's a really fascinating document and really a great resource for Forsyth County, since it's basically documenting what Forsyth County was like, 250 years ago, and all the plants that were there and sort of where. But Salem was established in 1766 and became the main hub of Moravian life in 1772, taking over Bethabara's role as the community center of activity. As part of this transition, most residents relocated from Bethabara to Salem, including the sisters, who carefully dug up and transported plants from the Bethabara Medicinal Garden to reestablish them in Salem, probably in the Sisters Garden at Salem, Single Sisters Garden. Designed to serve as a central trades town, Salem was strategically planned to be surrounded by agricultural villages, integrating commerce and cultivation as foundational elements of its community structure. In the theocratic town of Salem, where the church owned and governed all resources, one of the essential appointed roles was that of town forester. From 1772 to 1857, 11 different individuals served as foresters, managing the surrounding forest with an emphasis on both harvesting and conservation. These early Moravian foresters were notably forward-thinking in their understanding of watershed protection, preserving land around springs and strictly prohibiting the felling of trees in the creeks and to maintain clean and healthy water sources. This stewardship reflects Salem's commitment to sustainable land management within the church's broader governance framework. And then that's the tool that the foresters would use. They would inscribe into different trees if they were to be harvested and maybe for what use um, they could be harvested for. And then this is a list of Moravian foresters in Salem, going back, starting from Reuter, and they kind of kept that going right up through the 1850s, really, when the sort of the theocratic system dissolved. The concept of Moravian land ethic, as described by Old Salem's Director of Moravian Research, Martha Hartley, is deeply embedded in the intentional and sustainable land practices of the Moravian settlers. When choosing the site for Salem, Moravians strategically selected land on two ridges, the reliable water supply, which allowed them to establish early and innovative community waterworks system. Salem's waterworks included indoor water access, making it the second community in the nation to achieve this after Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. During his visit to Salem, George Washington was particularly impressed by this advanced infrastructure. In addition to community forestry and preserving watersheds, the Moravians employed terracing techniques to prevent erosion and improve soil quality, combining their natural history knowledge with practical land management. This blend of thoughtful settlement planning, water management, environmental stewardship represents the Moravian land ethic, an enduring model of sustainable community development and conservation. And these illustrations that are really neat. These were made in the 1920s by, I don't have the guy's name written down, but he was, I think he was maybe in his 80s. He was quite old at the time, and he taught himself to draw just so he could illustrate the waterworks that he had, and he remembered and had all in his head, and then so he illustrated. And there's a whole series of these. These are just a couple of them. From the late 1700s through the early 1800s, Salem became a center of botanical exploration, drawing several Moravian botanists who studied the region's flora. Many of these botanists were raised and educated in Moravian communities, especially in places like Bethlehem, with an education in natural history similar to that offered at Barbie. Their botanical records of Salem and surrounded areas have become invaluable historical resources guiding modern landscape restoration efforts at Old Salem. When Henry Muhlenberg published his 1818 catalog of 3,670 North American plants, a first for its kind, he acknowledged 28 contributors who supplied specimen or seeds, nearly one-fifth of whom had connections to Salem, North Carolina. After Muhlenberg's death, his personal herbarium, including specimens gathered by 6 botanists from Salem, was entrusted to the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. These connections underscore Salem's role in early American botanical study and its lasting impact on our understanding of North Carolina's historical plant landscape. These are the Moravian botanists who either lived in Salem or were associated. Anna Rosina Gambold, who we'll talk about here in a second, but everyone else lived there, and then Anna Rosina was out with the Cherokee at Spring Place. And this is the Henry Muhlenberg's catalog of American plants, and highlighted there the folks who contributed who were Moravian. And then Samuel Cramp, he was the first botanist that lived in Salem. He was the headmaster at the boys' school, and then later he was the first headmaster at the girls' school when they started the women's college. And he was also he taught in Bethlehem before he came here, and and there's the boys' school. And then so the boys' school, they would follow that same tradition that folks had learned, and like what they did in Barbie. They would go out and sort of expeditions and explore the Brothers Meadow or wherever, and learn about natural history and nature. Louis David von Schweinitz, often regarded as the father of American mycology, was born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and he was the great-grandson of Count Zinzendorf and son of Moravian church administrator. His passion for botany was sparked at an age during a tour of Nazareth Hall, where he encountered a lichen specimen that was introduced to him by Samuel Cramp. While studying theology in Saxony, he co-authored a survey of fungi in Upper Lusatia in 1805, which cataloged 1,130 fungi species, including 93 newly described species, sparking it the most comprehensive work on fungal classification at the time. In 1812, Schweinitz moved to Salem, North Carolina to serve as church administrator, where he compiled the Flora Salemitana, a record of Salem's plant life. His groundbreaking work in mycology led to the publication of his Synopsis Fungorum Carolina Superiorsis in 1822, detailing 1,373 species of fungi and introducing 320 novel species. His final publication, Synopsis of the American Fungi, in 1831, included over 1,200 species he discovered and named, along with 3,000 known species, establishing him as a pioneering figure in fungal taxonomy. Schweinitz's reputation as a botanist and mycologist extended internationally, supported by correspondence with prominent botanists in both Europe and America. He held memberships in prestigious societies, including the Linnaean Society in Paris and the Academy of Sciences in Philadelphia. Although offered the presidency of University of North Carolina, he declined to continue his work with the Moravian Church. His legacy endures with namesakes like the polypore Phaseolus schweinitzii, the rare Schweinitz's sunflower Helianthus schweinitzii, and his once namesake genus Schweinitzia, which is now Monotropsis. Schweinitz's dedication to the catalog and flora of each region he resided reflects the Moravian tradition of thorough natural documentation, and his work in Salem remains a foundational contribution to North American botanical and mycological studies. And there's his the cover of his fungi flora from Niesky and Lusatia in 1805, and there's the Schweinitz's sunflower, which looks like a lot of our other native sunflowers. But Christian Frederick Dinka was another botanist. I won't get too much into him, but he also lived in Salem. He lived in Canada, in Bethlehem, and then came down here and was in the Friedberg and Friedland communities, and then also here in Salem. He's notable that he's the first contributor to the Salem College herbarium with I think it's 1817. Some of his entries they still have there in the herbarium at the college. And then he sort of retired in Salem. He had been the pastor at a number of congregations, and then came here and finally sort of built what he thought was sort of his dream house, where he could have some land, and he had an orchard and a garden, and right there on Factory Row, near Old Salem. And then that house in the 1970s was about to be torn down, and the folks at Old Salem had it moved to Salt Street. So it's kind of down there on the end of Salt Street near the Cape Fear Garden, and that's where it lives today. Anna Rosina Gambold, though she was never a resident of Salem, was closely tied to the community through her work at the Salem-sponsored mission to the Cherokee at Spring Place, Georgia. Raised in Bethlehem, she was educated at the girls' school, went on to become a tutoress at the female seminary for 16 years, where she also composed poems, painted, and taught art. In 1805, she married John Gambold and committed to serving alongside him at the Spring Place mission to the Cherokee. Under the supervision of the Salem Church, Anna Rosina's life at Spring Place was marked by her dedication, both mission work and her botanical interests. Her correspondence detailing her mission experiences and botanical observations provides a valuable historical record of her unique role as an educator, artist, and observer of the natural world within the context of the Moravian outreach to the Cherokee. Anna Rosina made a lasting impact as a pioneering female botanist with her early publication, Plants of Cherokee Country, a work that not only documented the plant life of the region, but also highlighted the Cherokee people's cultural relationship with these plants. At the Spring Place mission, she cultivated a garden of botanical plants and gathered hundreds of specimens, many of which she sent to botanists in Salem and Pennsylvania. Her work stands out as both an important botanical resource and a and a tribute to the Cherokee's deep knowledge of the land, marking her as a significant figure, especially early female figure in early American botanical and cultural documentation. And then from here, really the botanical kind of energy of Salem goes over to Salem College. You have folks like Polly Steiner and Emma Lehman there, and students would go out and they would go kind of maybe not expedition. They would go out on exploratory walks. They would collect and plants for the herbarium there. They would often draw plants and learn to identify plants. And they had a extensive sort of pleasure gardens and like sort of big park area that was there behind there now, where like a lot of the Fine Arts Center and the parking lot are today. But yeah, there's same college. And then also with the men, the Young Men's Missionary Society, which started in 1840, was organized, and it began with specimens and information about natural history and cultural practices practiced by the worldwide network of Moravian missionaries. This collection grew with the same kind of specimens and information from Salem and surrounding areas. Eventually, the Young Men's Missionary Society kind of merged to become the Wachovia Historical Society, which was organized in 1895. And they sort of they passed on that natural history collection, went on to be part of the Wachovia Historical Society's collection, which still exists. Old Salem houses some of the Wachovia Historical Society's collection, and then some of the I know a lot of the Native American parts of that collection went to the Anthropology Museum here at Wake Forest, and then they're still active and with their mission, and they own the tavern building that Old Salem leases from them. Then another notable thing happened. Adelaide Fries, who was the archivist for a long time at the Southern Providence Archives and translated a lot of the records of the Moravians of North Carolina. She did a garden talk for a garden club about gardens of Old Salem, that what she remembered and what other folks remembered. And it's a great documentation of sort of that 100 years from, or 80 years from maybe 1850 to the 1930s, 1940s. And that was also published in this Old Salem, North Carolina book, and a version of that in 1940. And then we kind of get to sort of watch my time here. The early stages of the landscape restoration at Old Salem. The first was the Emma Griffith Memorial Garden. This garden was established by the Garden Club Council of Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, behind the Mick House, and it mirrored the 1761 medicinal garden. It featured modern brick pathways. During this period, the broader Old Salem district was characterized by its aged trees and well-maintained lawns, reflecting prevalent landscape styles of the 1950s and 60s. There's the landscape original plan for the Emma Ormsby Griffith Memorial Garden. And then I don't have notes for this. It got missed, but then Flora Ann Bynum, who was a resident of Old Salem, who she moved to Old Salem in 1950. She kind of took a lot of interest in the records of the Moravians and all the floras and documentation that we had, and really pushed to restore the landscape focused on authentic plant material, and got Frank Horton to let them start a landscape restoration committee, and then begin that work. And really, I wouldn't have a job if it weren't for Flora Ann Bynum. She's really what got the landscape restoration and the gardens program happening. And just learned today, this Friday will be would have been Flora Ann's 100th birthday. But because of that work, a board committee was formed in 1972 to initiate a program for reconstruction of Old Salem's historical landscape. This committee focused on ensuring accurate restoration of the late 18th, 19th century gardens, interpreting, revitalizing landscape for the public. And then they also reviewed landscape plans for properties associated with Old Salem, folks who lived in the historic district. And during this time, Flora Ann Bynum had a saying and a talk, plants have histories too. And we've kind of taken that to heart today as well, just to try to also tell the plants have histories too, and they're interesting. So we do a lot of work just to tell those stories. During 73 to 1975, Old Salem's landscape restoration focused on fidelity and public engagement. They saw a bunch of walking tours. They did tree tours and labeled trees. And then Peter Hatch was the first staff horticulturalist. He started in 1974, which really pushed things forward. And Peter Hatch would only be there for a couple years, but he would go on to work at Monticello and have a whole career there restoring the gardens at Monticello. And then here's Peter and Peggy Cornett in the garden, and Peggy's she's still at Monticello. She's the curator of historic plants there. And I think that's I know it's Peter Hatch. I'm pretty sure that's Peggy Cornett as well, working on doing the Salt Street Garden terraces. And then that's what they ended up looking like. And then they worked on this is the Salem Arboretum. They planted in 1977. And for what it looked like in 1977, and this is what that area down below Mesda looks like today. This period marked Old Salem's growing national recognition in historic landscape restoration, highlighting its influential role in the first Restoring Southern Gardens and Landscapes Conference, first organized by Old Salem in collaboration with Stagville and Renolda Gardens. Flora Ann Bynum, now a key figure in this movement, contributed extensively through the networking and publication of the Old Salem Garden Guidebook, authoritative resources on Old Salem's garden and landscape restoration and educational outreach. In the 1980s, we kind of horticulture program grow. We had a horticulturalist, Philip Page, that was there in the early 80s, and Page had worked at Monticello. And he introduced seed-saving practices, initially sourcing flowers from the Shakers, mirroring historical practices from the 1830s, because they had sold seeds from the Shakers in the 1830s in Salem. And things that are exciting to me and to I know folks at the time is they got a tractor and really built out their greenhouse infrastructure for the time. And that greenhouse is where the visitor center parking lot is now at Old Salem. The 80s were also marked by continued research and publication of numerous articles and the flourishing of the Restoring Southern Gardens and Landscapes Conference, which would later evolve into a biennial event. The Southern Garden History Society was established in 1982, and Flora Ann was one of the 3 founding members. Born out of the network created from the Landscape Conference and nurtured by Old Salem, the Southern Garden History Society grew into a self-sufficient what happened? Grew into a self-sufficient nonprofit still active today. In the 1990s, under Daryl Spencer's tenure, they focused on trying to make the landscape even more authentic. The main thing was they restored the mixed garden from the sort of brick pathway medical garden to a more accurate version of what the garden might have looked like. And they finished that in 1996. And then starting in 2004 was the big restoration of the Single Brothers Garden, where the visitor center and visitor center parking lot once stood, based on sort of like some photos we have from the 1880s and 90s, and then also documentation of just descriptions from the time. There's the work doing that work, restoring the Brothers Garden. Then in 2006, the Old Salem community mourned the loss of Flora Ann Bynum. She was a pivotal figure in historic landscape restoration. She served as chair of Landscape Restoration Committee from 1975 and Secretary Treasurer of Southern Garden History Society from 1982 through to 2005. And Bynum's influence extended beyond academic circles. Known as a rogue scholar, her contributions to the field have left a lasting legacy, remembered with deep affection and admiration by those who knew her personally and those familiar with her enduring legacy to historical horticulture. It's difficult to overestimate the influence Flora Ann Bynum had on Old Salem's landscape and gardens. The same year of Flora Ann's passing, Old Salem changed its name to Old Salem Museums and Gardens to better reflect the increasing importance of the garden program and to clearly distinguish there were multiple experiences available with the Old Salem district. And then this is just more about the landscape today. Old Salem, the museum owns about 33 acres within the historic district that we attend, all full of native trees and shrubs that have been planted over the last 50 years. And, we're just trying to keep them from dying right now. And then, care for them and then filling in and continuing to plant as every little bit every year as we go. We're planting a bunch of mainly fruit trees and some native trees this fall. PEI, which was laid out in the late 70s as plants of economic importance. We've been renaming it, keeping the PEI, but calling it plants of ecological importance. We planted a lot of native shrubs down there in that area, and that's along Salt Street behind the tavern in the Tavern Meadow area. And then the gardens today, it's really the mix in the Treble Garden, the Salt Street Gardens, we're trying to hold on to and care for as staffing allows and as we have time. And then the Brothers Garden, it's kind of front and center and takes a lot of time. There's the mix in the Treble Gardens, the mixed garden, some photos of the mixed garden, and then the Single Brothers Garden. And then we've got a big focus on seed saving as, part of maintaining the historic plant collection. It's all the annual plants, especially the vegetable varieties. But then we also think of the trees and shrubs in the landscape as part of the plant collection. 187 historic heirloom varieties of vegetable and grains, 129 heirloom flowers and herbs, 87 different native tree and shrub species, and then 32 heirloom fruit varieties, even though we're adding about a dozen varieties to that this year. And then kind of running out of time, but these are just some of the unique varieties in the collection to the things that have connection to the Moravians. Some of the impact of genetic preservation, some of the places that we were able to share seeds or plant material with places where people might have started to lose things or larger entities like Seed Savers Exchange Network or Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, who we've shared this really rare squash variety with, and then the Schutz cucumber is a local heirloom cucumber dating back to the 1875, and had ties to, this is Plowboy Jarvis and Jarvis corn, which we don't have time to get into. And we did some work with African American seeds and foodways. We had Michael Twitty, who's a African American foodways scholar, come back and help us with that. And recently this is our Seed Saving Garden Lab, which we opened in 2019. It was open just for a few months before COVID hit. And then when we reopened it in 2021 until just beginning of this year, it was a great place. And we moved that over to what we're calling our Horticulture Center. It's in the Single Brothers Workshop. And I wish I had updated or have it. It looks even better than it does there now. But I didn't update the pictures. But it looks out, these windows look out over the Mix and Treble Gardens and the Single Brothers Garden. So it's really, it's a well-suited place for a horticulture center in Old Salem, kind of right in the core next to the gardens. And this is all kind of new for us at Old Salem to have a way for visitors to really engage and interact and learn about the gardens, which is something we were really missing for most of the time we've had gardens. And these rooms now, it's becoming a little bit like that Cabinet of Curiosities room in Barbie, trying to make it a similar kind of space for kids in particular to learn about. And yeah, that's it as far as kind of a whirlwind. But done at 1:30.
Can we ask questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment, and I'm unanimous in this. You've given us a dazzlingly contextualized and fluid presentation. And I ardently hope you will be involved to take what you've assembled here and all else you know to convince the Old Salem Museum Gardens trustees to back you in making this a worldwide accessible publication in English.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's kind of my intention behind this, is just to even sort of advocate for the gardens and landscapes role at Old Salem. And what I feel could be a real core component of the experience there.
Great pride in yourself and your associates.
Thanks.
Any horticultural meeting in the English speaking world today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It is not. No, that's something that we should in time. I would love to be able to reprint that. And neither that nor I didn't talk about the Gardens of Old Salem book by Daryl Spencer. It's also out of print now. I have a few copies. We have copies at Old Salem. I have a few in our office, but I may try to digitize it. I'd like to digitize and just do an archive of things that could be available, at least online. It's pretty easy to do now. So.
Like the upland gardens and the medicinal gardens that you showed earlier.
Yeah, so they're both the gardens there at Bethabara. They're right next to each other. The upland garden is the big community garden, vegetable garden there, and then the medicinal garden is right next to it. So yeah, both of those are right around the corner from here. Yeah, those are the original location based on archaeology they did there back in the 80s. Because when Old Salem first did those gardens, they did the tree bowl based on the upland garden and the mix based on the medicinal garden. And at the time, those gardens didn't exist in Bethabara, but they've since done archaeology and redid those. But yeah, those are good gardens to visit. Well, thanks, everyone.
Questions online. So yeah, thank you, everyone. We hope to see you next week. And thank you, Eric.
Yeah, you're welcome.